PODS and land exchange for climate resilience. The objective of this presentation is to address a problem, a challenge that the fractured checkerboard of land ownership in the West creates. The solution is a landscape-scale approach to addressing this underlying cause of wildfire and landscape management conflicts. The approach utilizes the tool of land exchange informed by PODS, potential operational delineations, to directly address the disjointed parcels which have led to costly conflicts and disorganized response to wildfires and other climate change challenges. On June 30th of 2022, the Western governors recognized the significance of this problem with a policy calling on Congress to adopt legislation to expedite solutions to the fragmented checkerboard. The FAO of the UN also expressed support for land reorganization, stating concentrated land tenureship as central to the fight against climate change. Locally, the problem of fractured land ownership can be directly addressed by reorganizing the checkerboard into continuous parcels that can be managed cohesively. Oregon can utilize land exchanges for the betterment of disaster management, fire resilience, and public interest. So, how did we get here, to this checkerboarded landscape? Well, let's take a step back, 237 years back, to the time of the Revolutionary War in 1775. The United States was forming as a country, and having just won their independence, needed to pay off some war debts and expand its territories. The Western Territories were ceded to the growing nation who created the Public Land Ordinance and the PLS system. The PLS is that checkerboard you see across the state, while timber harvests are in squares, and agriculture looks like a patchwork quilt from the airplane. The checkerboard made it easy to hand out ownership tickets, but it was a matter of expedited nation building, not exactly the most strategic way to manage landscapes, respond to environmental disasters, or reflect any deep relationship or understanding of a landscape. So these little square morsels were handed out like someone about to yell bingo. States were given 70 million acres of townships with Section 16 and 32 reserved for schools. That was under the Common School Fund. And railroads were given 130 million acres, alternating every other square mile, creating a checkerboarded pattern in what became known as Oregon and California counties. These ONC territories, Oregon and California territories, are particularly of concern because at their initiation in 1812, the counties in these ONC areas, which are in Oregon west of the Cascades, received a hugely significant portion of proceeds from all timber sales. That made these counties disproportionately dependent on the quantity and frequency of timber plantation harvests more than any other counties. You could say that there were a lot of nefarious dealings in the salons those days, and land deeds were signed away easier with a whiskey in hand. By 1883, the superintendent of census had already identified the problem by saying, "The unsettled area has been so broken into by isolated bodies of settlement that there can hardly be said to be a frontier line." That broken line is made even more dangerous in the face of massive wildfires, where a strong continuous lines means the difference between stopping a wildfire or getting into a megafire. Little heed was given to the previous land managers of these territories, the indigenous nations, who had successfully continuous management of these landscapes for hundreds and thousands of years. It wasn't until 1924 that indigenous nations were able to apply for citizenship on the same territory they have lived for generations. Indigenous claims to public lands were dismissed, and their participation in the Homesteading Act and in federal land exchanges was largely overlooked. This chaos of land grabbing from 1780 to 1860 was eventually ended by President Theodore Roosevelt, who initiated the conservation period in 1891. He single-handedly established the USFS, the United States Forest Service, the National Forest, and reserved 230 million acres, creating national parks, national monuments, and game and bird reserves. That's the basics of how we got to this grid system of land ownership. Not surprisingly, it creates a lot of conflict, so land exchanges have been a continuous tool to trade out federal lands for non-federal lands. In 1976, land exchanges were updated to be more ethical and cohesive with the FLPMA, Federal Lands Policy and Management Act. Since then, land exchanges have continued to mature and be refined for objectives that ideally truly meet the greatest public good. For us in Oregon, the benefits of utilizing the tool of land exchanges can be organized into 3 categories: public interest, disaster management, and fire resilience. See this handy-dandy list. So, what is the future of our landscapes? The future of land exchanges is also the future of how we steward, work, and manage our land. When the challenge is complex, having a detailed, effective map with a shared foundation improves the chance of success. Improving cross-boundary wildfire management is identified as a top national priority, providing a better platform to face global climatic disasters effectively. In the Pacific Northwest, our landscapes are continuously in relationship with fire. Wildfires have been a historical feature in this landscape and have both positive and negative impacts on the ecosystems and societies that depend on these landscapes for livelihoods. As a firefighter here, one sees the incredible renewal provided by fire, the regeneration of plant communities, and the active drawdown and mineralization of CO2. A firefighter also sees the difficulties between land managers and their objectives, depending on if they have timber investments on the landscape or leaning more towards resource objectives. The grid system doesn't provide fire lines that make any sense. They oftentimes are neither safe for us first responders or cost-effective for the managers and stakeholders. In response to these dangers and costly conflict, a tool is created by the Rocky Mountain Research Station Wildfire Risk Management Science Team and Forest Service, called PODS. PODS stands for the Potential Operational Delineations. It's an incredibly effective and rational tool that provides firefighters and decision makers the opportunity to create a strategy using the best available information and maps of a landscape to design and designate where is the best chance to hang up a fire. The pod is both a packet of information and a unit area on the ground. The packet is composed of information and maps such as elevations and locations of ridgelines, roads and rivers, fuel types and characteristics, suppression difficulty index, WUI wildland-urban interface threats, and historical fire data. By overlaying all this information, one can begin to see the fireshed, or the natural regional boundaries as determined by the landscape. Fireshed recognition is an important factor, just as watershed recognition, for the health and safety of living systems. The creation of pods happens in 3 steps. First, a group of firefighters and folks who know the land gather together and look at the information. They then create a preemptive strategy, drawing lines on the map where they determine will be the best place to hold a line and stop a wildfire. The next step is with the land managers and the stakeholders. Looking at these strategic holding lines the firefighters have created, the land managers and stakeholders can then determine a strategy of response. Is it suppression? Is it to hold line? There are some adjustments made depending on the values, investments, managerial perspectives, and budget allocations. Then the third and final stage is to determine the mitigation strategy and intention for each pod area. Is it colored in red with full suppression, much like you would see in the wildland-urban interface, WUI, or timber plantations? Or is it yellow, a more transitional area? Or green, a healthy forest ecosystem that is readily adapted to intermediate wildfires burning for resource objectives? Pods and land exchanges work in a partnership together. Pods create the priority areas for land exchanges, and land exchanges create a cohesive management area inside the pod. Just as a species will migrate in the face of climate change, our federal lands will have to do some migration as well. A successful adaptation program will need to reconfigure or realign the pattern of federal land holdings with emerging needs. ODF and Oregon can meet these emerging needs. What is the role of ODF in the state of Oregon in the context of these land exchanges? Oregon and ODF have played a leading role in the historical makings of the West and have had considerable influence on the nation's relationship to natural resources and our collective wildlands. It is only logical, then, to continue our role as responsible stewards and land managers to put forth the effort in renewing our commitments to the people, natural resources, and our ecosystem. ODF has considerable responsibility considering its relationships with the private landowners and federal stewards that we interact with daily. There are 5 main roles that ODF and the BOF, Board of Forestry, can step into for this initiative. The first is leadership, recognizing the problem and developing landscape-scale solutions. Secondly, lowering cost. ODF can mitigate the transaction cost of land exchanges by creating effective processes for identifying land for exchange and coordinating with multiple funding sources for the collaboration of stakeholders. Time and transaction cost and disaster response costs can be alleviated that way. Third, technical fire expertise. As a leader in wildland fire with trained fire personnel, Oregon Department of Forestry is in a position to develop and inform PODS that can be used effectively for fire management and ecosystem benefits. Fourth, facilitator. ODF already has established relationships with the stakeholders and understands each land manager's position and objectives. ODF is ideally situated to work with the federal agencies and private owners. And lastly, fifth, ODF can develop legislation that would help support the program. So, in a nutshell, there's PODS in land exchanges for climate resilience. Thank you for listening. We hope that you will join this community of researchers in expanding how PODS can be applied into our landscapes. Thanks.